Stacked between this Magni 3 and Modi multi-bit are the new Magni 3 Plus and Magni Heresy. Now, aside from the fancy paint job, what's the difference between them and why two new models? Well, Schiit Audio sent me both models to check out and review, and here's what I found out. To start with, I thought I'd take a look inside both the Magni 3 Heresy, which I've got on the left, and the non-heretical edition, as it's called, the 3 Plus. Well, the difference between them is that, well, there are some similarities. There's some kind of regulation on some power supply capacitors here so that there's a power reserve, so there's enough power to power headphones sufficiently. And then you've got the main amplification circuits, of which there are two channels and 8 op-amps in the main amplification stage of the heretical edition, the Heresy, and discrete components inside the non-heretical edition, the 3 Plus. And although these things look like op-amps, I mean they have 8 legs, they're not op-amps. I'll explain that a little bit if I bring out the old Magni 3 here. We can see the original circuit. Now, what it uses, of course, it uses transistors. Transistors are used for amplification. We do have an op-amp for a kind of gain stage, or buffer or gain stage, and then we have, you can just see them, they're pretty tiny. Normal transistors, full-size ones are quite a bit bigger, but little ones you can see here through the 3 pins on these in here, and you've got larger transistors as well. This is your circuit for left and right, or right and left. I'm not sure which is which. And you can see this is an amplification circuit for one channel and the other channel. What's happened in the 3 Plus? Now the thing with these is all components have a slight amount of variation. So if you have, you might have 2 transistors, but they're very slightly in their performance. And so what in high-end gear, where you pay a lot of money, the manufacturer will take the transistors and measure them all and then match them in pairs so that they perform, so that you get more even and more linear performance. Now, what it turns out conveniently you can buy is pre-matched pairs inside a single chip. So this is actually 2 transistors inside each of these. This is a buffer for the main amplification circuit, which does use op-amps, but these things here are actually matching transistors, so that it means you can cheaply build a high quality circuit with matched components without having to tediously measure each single one, these components are all what are called surface mount. They're put on the surface of the board and then soldered on. Old school components were through hole. Now, when we're talking about the 3 Heresy, they use op-amps, and these ones have got surface mount op-amps. 9 of them, with 1 for the buffer or gain, which is probably a 2-channel one, and then we have 8, probably 4 for each channel. Now, these are basically a whole amplification circuit like this, inside a single chip. Actually, the normal, and we're talking about 3-hole components, I have a single op-amp here, you can see. It's actually an old 2134, which is a very common op-amp. And you can see it's got little legs, and that would be put through the board, through holes in the board, and then soldered by hand. These things are, of course, surface mount, and they're smaller. You can get them even smaller still, but this is basically an old school op-amp, and it's an entire circuit on a chip. Now, if you want to get an idea what an entire circuit on a chip looks like, if this thing, I'll just put it back in its foam, were to be made with individual full-sized discrete components, it looks like this. This is a full-sized op-amp using discrete components. It's an old one from Audio GD, but you can see the through components. Their individual transistors are all there. They're black, many of them, and you see each channel, and they're the legs are put through holes in the bottom of the board, and they're soldered. And then you've got the pins, which we saw on the bottom of the same pins which we saw on the bottom of the op-amp there. So that's what an op-amp is. So you can imagine that everything in here, it fits into one of these little chips, and actually in the gain stage there too. So that's what an op-amp is. So there are benefits and detriments to the op-amps. I recommend you read the Shit Happen chapter that Mike posted about it. If you want actual lots of power, you need discrete components. Op-amps are kind of limited in how much power they can deliver. With discrete components, you can build a circuit as you wish. And in this case, Mike says this is basically a miniature version of the Vidar speaker amp circuit, in essence. So that's what you have inside here, is you have these discrete components, although they look like op-amps, they're not. And then that's a whole circuit that Mike designed for this amp. And this is another one, but it uses a series of op amps, I guess, in parallel to deliver an even load. And it's interesting that, of course, these will have very subtle variations in, they'll probably measure very, very slightly differently. It's interesting in the measurements that there is one particular measurement, I can't remember which it is, I think it's the power versus distortion, which is completely even for this circuit, but very slightly wonky, but not wonky enough to matter for the Magni 3 Heresy. So that's kind of interesting, and I wonder if it related to my experience of the sound. I don't know. I speculate it might, and you can get my impressions of the sound. You'll get an idea. Interesting thing too is that there's the LED which is inside that shines up, and the LED on this one shines out the front. There's where it normally would be connected. So now you probably want to know what I think of the sound. So in listening, I got to compare the 3 Plus and 3 Heresy with a variety of gear. I have drop Sennheiser HD6XX, since it's a common kind of headphone that I expect people will be using with these amps. Another one which I think was not only kind of something that I think people will use, but also is good for comparing the sound quality of components is Hi-Fi Man Sundaras. They're relatively inexpensive, $350 you can get them for, but actually they're quite resolving, very good sounding. And I found that plugging them into different amps, I could notice the difference between amps more readily. So if I go from a cheap amp up to something very expensive like my Studio 6 behind me, it's very noticeable, the difference. So I thought that's kind of a lot of what I used, and I decided also to, just because I don't listen loud, to simulate the listening loud. Rather than turn the volume up really loud and risk damaging my hearing, I actually used Hi-Fi Man Susvaras, which are extremely low sensitivity headphones. They're kind of like, people plug them into speaker amps, they're so low sensitivity, and they require very high output from amps, and that's when amps, you can hear distinctly if an amp starts falling apart in how it can control the drivers, how it can manage the sound. So in doing that, I mean, it's not a realistic option, but it's something just to help me compare the amps. Now, in general listening, both amps were pretty excellent. Now, if I compare to probably the best way to describe it, if I compared it to the old Magni 3, the old Magni 3, incidentally, which you can get very cheap while they still have stock, it did a pretty competent job for $99, but the whole kind of sound that came out felt like it was just like a wall of sound coming at me, and there was no sense of depth. So there was kind of, everything was just one thing of sound. There was kind of width, but no depth. But the amazing thing about that is that the Magni 3 Plus and the 3 Heresy, that sense of depth started coming out from those. It was like a distinct jump up. It was a kind of distinct jump up that I expect to get from the Asgard. Now, the Asgard was a distinct jump up. There was more of a sense of depth coming out of the music, especially under a lot of load, of course, maybe those. But even with regular headphones, there was a bit of a jump up, but the gap between this and the Magni has been narrowed considerably with the 3 Plus and 3 Heresy. It was, at the volumes I listened, it was pretty close. It was not like the Asgard was, doubly as good, although it probably should be. I mean, its value, it should be being sold for I thought it should be sold for $250 or $300. I mean, I expected they might have put up the price, but no, maybe because the fact that they're about to come out with these new amps, which are just so close for regular listening. If you have fairly undemanding headphones, which is probably, if you're spending only, around $200 for a pair of headphones, like for these drop Sennheisers, then the difference will be kind of very minimal. Now, and then these amps are not as clear sounding as the THX amps. The THX amps are really detailed, and it's amazing what THX has done with these circuits, because these I can plug into, a better DAC, a high-end DAC, like the Yggdrasil sitting behind me, and notice a difference. Notice a difference in detail, which is pretty awesome. And, but we're still getting, under $300 still, which is probably why, these things are getting way down cheap. And, under $400. But if you really want to not spend too much money, these things did a really impressive job at just generally driving general headphones and being generally listenable. So close to the Asgard, again, at that level. Now, something closer to its price is the iFi Zen DAC, which you'll also see a review of. And it has balanced out. Don't read too much into that. But it's only USB powered. So the thing is, these have a lot more power on tap because they have wall warts to power them. They have separate power supplies. This is limited to the 5 volts and whatever it is in milliamps of current available from USB. So it has a lot less power. I think it's, it's under 500 milliwatts actually. So that this hit a wall in terms of driving headphones much sooner than these do. So I actually used this as a DAC among the, as well as the Modi Multibit and others, to supply each of these, and then compared the balanced out of this, and the single-ended actually, versus the single-ended out of the Magni 3 and Magni 3 Plus. Now I think Schiit in the end did the right thing and kept this single-ended. You don't need balanced in something down at this price range. You don't want to go, oh, the amp is only $99, but then I have to spend all this money on aftermarket cable and blah, 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 blah. You don't want to do that. So I think this is more sensible than having a balanced output at $139. That aside, if I plug this into the Schiit Audio amps, it improved, of course, probably mainly because it had more power on the, the sound quality of this little DAC, which actually is a really nice little DAC. So there was a distinct jump up there. So the only situation in which I could actually get a very significant difference between the power, these and say the Asgard was to plug in the Susvaras, which of course, as I said before, is an unrealistic thing. I don't imagine people were buying even the old HE6s second hand or the new HE6 SE to use with something like this. They'll probably get a cheap speaker amp. That being said, I did it just to see what the difference would be like. Now these are just old kind of Class A, Class AB amps, which means they go Class A, and when they run out of power in Class A, they level up, they go off into Class AB, and you lose some dynamic there. This uses the new continuity system, which going from Class A to Class AB, it keeps its linearity. And it was very noticeable under load. I mean, I had these things near maximum volume using the Yggdrasil as the DAC, and this thing, it just couldn't deliver the bass at all with the Susvaras, and this could, which was very impressive how well this thing kept up even at something like probably what was like near maximum output. So in that, of course, that's the main thing. But for most people using ordinary headphones, again, like maybe like the Sundaras or the 6XX or any kind of headphones around that price range, the difference, and as long as you're not trying to blast your ears out, and I advise you should never try and blast your ears out, very high volumes will damage your hearing and it's not recoverable, don't do it. At moderate listening levels, the difference was very, very fine. It was very, very close. And it makes me feel like this Asgard 3 is sandwiched kind of between these cheap amps and these THX amps. It's in this kind of narrow place where someone could easily go, I have more money to spend than $99. They might start jumping way up here rather than to the Asgard. I mean, the Asgard's probably value is that you can put a DAC card in it at $400, have one rig and just be satisfied with that. So it was kind of interesting, and it makes me wonder if Schiit Audio did, one of the reasons for pricing the Asgard low was because they knew they were about to release two amps which were pretty kick-ass. Now you're thinking, Amos, well, what's the difference between the sound of the amps? Well, the difference is they're $99. I mean, why are you going to be that caring? I mean, if it was $999, it's kind of, I feel silly comparing the sound of two $99 products. It's kind of like, well, either they do a decent job or they don't do a decent job. But just for the sake of, because you're curious, these were my impressions. My impression in general was the Heresy sounded a little bit more kind of lively in music. Like stuff could jump out, like, oh, this thing in the treble will jump out, or this mid thing in the mids will jump out, or this thump in the bass will. It was kind of a little bit more exciting sound, whereas the old school 3 Plus sounded kind of more like competent, like it's even in its presentation. It was like very. Like the way it presented bass, the way it presents mids, and the way it presents treble was all very even. And it wasn't noticeable on all music. Some music was kind of like I couldn't notice a difference. And then some music, you'd have that Heresy thing where it sounds a little bit more exciting, but a little bit, but I mean, when you switch to the 3 Plus, then the 3 Plus sounds a little bit more competent. It's kind of like, it was 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It was pretty close, and again, I feel kind of silly making the comparison almost. But just for the sake of, it was kind of fascinating to compare two different circuit topologies and the subtle differences between them, even when they're designed to be, both extremely even in how they present stuff. So if you're wondering, so Amos, which should I pick? And the answer is, do you like red and black or do you like silver? I'm serious. Pick the one that looks cool to you. I mean, honestly, they will do such a good job. I even plugged IEMs into them. I even plugged the super sensitive. These are the new Andromeda MW10s. These are of course a bit of a rare case as well. These are super sensitive, And so they pick up hiss like nobody's business. These things were extremely quiet in low gain. Like almost at any volume you're going to use them, almost no hiss. It was like nothing. Excellent for IEM use as well. So in general, I just find both amps really competent. It's only if you're going to be really jacking the thing up to high power where they start to lose out, where you start to lose it starts to lose control of the drivers. Again, at my moderate listening levels, they were really nice to use and really enjoyable. And even with headphones, which are a little bit demanding, like, the Sundaras. We also have the Verum ones, which are kind of sitting behind me on a hook. Stuff like that even drove really, really well out of them. It's, again, only more if you want something more demanding, or you're going to go for a larger amp with more power and you have more money to spend, that you might consider spending something more than that. And I'm thinking, like 13 years ago when I joined Headphone, I would have loved to have something this good for $99. Now, I tend to be conservative in my impressions of stuff, as you all know, but I'm really impressed with these. These are really kick-ass little amps for $99. And if that's your budget, well, now, unlike when I started, when I kind of had to spend, $300-400 to get something good, you only have to spend $99. And that's really excellent. And then you've got plenty of money left over for headphones and other gear, and just pick. I found them pretty good with whatever DAC I plugged in. You can plug in maybe even a phone or a DAP or something else if you have something else and you just want a bit more power than the output of, say, you have a player of some kind which doesn't have much output power. These will do fine. So I hope you enjoyed my review. I hope it was useful for you. If you do have any questions, comments, or constructive criticism, do post them below. Did you buy one of these amps? And tell me what you think of it. Did you find a good pairing or a bad pairing, or was there something I've missed? Do let me know. Also, don't forget, thank you to everyone who supported my videos. It is because of these people that I'm able to continue making videos. So if you'd like to become a supporter, you get to see my impressions of gear as it comes in, rather than having to wait for the review. If you'd like to ask me questions about audio gear to help you, make good purchases, you're welcome to do that. If you be supporters, are welcome to do that anytime. Check out the link below and in the description for how to do that. So thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you online.